Hey everybody, Conan Neutron here. It really sucks to be doing another one of these RIP episodes so soon after the great Gary Floyd's passing. This one hits really hard too. This is, of course, if you had not heard the news, Steve Albini just passed away from cardiac arrest. Not a heart attack, a cardiac arrest. And it's huge. It's a huge deal. He did just recently join me for the 10-year anniversary episode of Protonic Reversal, which I found to be very giving of him and very much in character. He mentioned that it's a normal thing to do, right? And in this episode, he actually articulates something somewhat similar to that. But in a world of influencers, personal brands, and fevered ego, sometimes the normal thing to do is anything but. So sorry, Steve, being a refusenik in playing the game is leadership, whether you want to be or not. Deal with it. Anyway, I'm stunned, frankly. And I had been meaning to put this episode and another one of his earlier episodes up for a while now, but I've also been taking my break from doing the show seriously to sort of recharge the batteries after the slog of the 10-year anniversary episode. What can I say? I think I have a tendency to just discount all of the early shows as baby pictures. In fact, I believe I have said as much. I feel like they're worthwhile, but I don't think I went quite as deep as I do now, and so I tend to be sort of embarrassed or diminish them. I will say this, I listened back to this, which I never really do. Steve is very consistent in here. Some of the things that he said here could be paraphrased, and are paraphrased very eloquently for more recent appearances. We also talk about the record by the band Teeth, John Grabski, and confronting mortality. And that is unfortunately kind of timely. For newcomers to the show, this early episode from 2015, so this would have been in the first year of the show, episode 21, also features Brenna Betts, my old co-host, who was fantastic. She gets into great questions as well. Yeah, the Teeth record is, that was a man with cancer who had never made the record he wanted to make. It's a really inspiring story. I urge you to check it out. It's interesting to hear about Spotify in the context of almost 10 years ago and pay stream models, things along those lines. We talk about longevity versus productivity. And yeah, the fact that Dude Incredible was brand new at the time. This is almost 10 years ago, and this is with the new Shellac record incoming. Anyway, I'm rambling because I have been kind of screwed up all day. And it's not like Steve Albini and I were great friends necessarily, but he's a figure that looms large in this world. If you're here, you know that. And this is the old episode, first episode of his appearance on Protonic Reversal, episode 21. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Sorry, I've not made this episode available on some of the formats, and I am now, so there you go. And I'm probably gonna do another one of these revisits with the other one. I'm still in shock, frankly, so hopefully this ramble is not too offensive, but anyway, here it is. Thanks.
By Drive Like Jehu, which was the terminus of my story of going to see them at that awesome thing. And on the phone, joining us right now, we have Mr. Steve Albini. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks for being on the show, man.
Hey, no problem. Are you calling me from a train station? Because I'm hearing quite a bit of ambient noise.
Yeah, for a radio station, we got a lot of devices here that certainly do make a lot of noise, including there's a fan above you. We got the windows open. There's trucks driving by. We are community radio station, Radio Valencia, center of everywhere, middle of the Mission District.
Sure, lovely part of town.
It is, and it's what I like about it personally is that you can hear the character of the neighborhood in the show. What I don't like about it is you constantly are hearing the character of the neighborhood in the show.
character.
Okay. Fair enough.
If we're lucky, they might be laying asphalt.
Indeed, if we're really lucky. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time, man. We really appreciate having you on.
Not a problem. I'm not doing much at this time of the day, so any time I can do something more interesting than sitting around waiting for the client to get here or catching up on my correspondence, which is something I'm notoriously bad at, then I'm happy to do it. And you are today's distraction.
Fantastic. I enjoy being a distraction. It's a lovely place to be. Speaking of correspondence, that's actually something that I want to talk to you about. It seems like there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I know this somewhat from personal experience, you're seen as a sort of like a punk rock guru of sorts, like the person that someone comes on the mountain to get the wisdom from. In fact, I think
I'm real close to hanging up right now.
Well, I'm only saying this because I know personally that when I had a couple of my terrible ideas, I actually consulted you. It was like, hey, is this a terrible idea? And you were there, you took the time to talk to some idiot such as myself that you barely have any idea of who I am.
I think it's presumptuous to think that you're above speaking to other people, and I hate to be presumptuous. So whenever somebody asks me a question, I feel obliged to answer it. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be an exhaustive answer, but I do feel a kind of, just as a matter of common courtesy, if somebody's taken the trouble to ask me a question, they deserve some kind of an answer. Sometimes that answer is, don't bother me with questions like this, but it's not, that's not too likely.
Sure, exactly. Yeah,
presumably somebody is asking me something, asking me a question, thinking that I have a perspective on it that will enlighten them in some way. And so I'm going to, take those inquiries at face value and try to help somebody out.
Well, and that is awesome, and I like that you present as if this is something that an average, normal, caring, feeling human being would do, because I agree with that. But
just think about it. Like, if you were to walk up to somebody on the street and say, "Hey, what time is it?" Him not answering you would be him being a dick, right? So it's basically that, but it also involves people sending me unsolicited emails,
right?
Saying,
Absolutely.
"Hey, what time is it?"
But it is interesting to me that, it seems like you get a lot of interesting things coming over the transom. And one thing that, when you were kind enough to join me on the other show sometime back, that I was kicking myself for forgetting to talk to you about was the Teeth record and John Grabski. Brenna, are you familiar with this at all? Have we talked about this?
No.
Okay, so the idea behind this is there was this fella, John Grabski, that terminal cancer, right? And
John Grabski was a musician who had already fought cancer to a draw once, and the cancer had reasserted itself, and he had been given a terminal diagnosis, and he decided that he wanted to spend the rest of his life exploring all of his creative passions. He wanted to spend the rest of his life like cooking and hanging out with his girlfriend and hanging out with his kids and making music. And he committed to doing that for the rest of his life. And a lot of people could say that, I want to spend the rest of my life doing this, but here's a guy who actually had like a realistic chance of completing that goal, that is spending the rest of his life doing just the things that were important to him and his family. So and he contacted me and wanted to know if I could help, and I said, yeah, of course.
And my understanding of it, and I never met the man in person, but he was a fellow that had played in bands before, but never had really felt that whatever he had played in and whatever he had done really reached the potential of what he was trying to do. And so he had this unrealized dream of like, hey, I want to make a record that sounds like this thing I have in my head, and I would like to do it with this person. And so what is that? Like, is that an average day at the office for you? Is that
well,
it's an amazing story.
In a manner, yeah. The 6 months or so that I spent working with John Grabski making that record, and then seeing how he conducted himself during that, and how he managed his condition, and how he maintained productivity, even though the disease was like totally attacking him. It was absolutely inspirational for me. I now have a role model for, when the time comes where I have to address my mortality in a very immediate fashion.
Right.
I now have a role model. I've seen somebody do it in a way that was, as pure as any other enterprise that somebody could conduct, So that was totally inspirational. But also, while he was making the record, he was very candid about the idea that the record was meant to be, it was a way of him addressing and dealing with the disease itself.
Right.
And I couldn't help but think of how other people are going to be going through what John Grabski went through. Other people are going to be having to contend with cancer that won't go away and that is likely going to end them, and that his record as a first-person account and as sort of as a journal of the experience could have greater utility and greater meaning than just something for him. It seemed like it could be something for the rest of the world as well, and I, having run across other cancer patients who have encountered the album is called The Strain, but having run into other cancer patients who have encountered that record and have said that record was like uniquely suited to helping them address their disease, I feel like he really accomplished something monumental with that record.
Well, absolutely. And if I think about it, I can't think of a single other record that embodies those feelings and that point of view. Like come from someone that, clearly has been given the punch ticket of hey, time's up. Like you've got like this amount of time to do these things, and then writing about the experience of what that means. I mean, it's powerful stuff. And it was incredible. I mean, it was one of those things that I kind of watched it from afar, and I certainly contacted the man, and he bought the record when it came out. But it was sort of like there was a couple moments where it's like, okay, is he going to stick the landing on this? Is he going to be able to physically pull this off? I mean, the man was definitely.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of his life, he was pretty weak. But I think, one of the important chapters of that whole exercise to me was he finished making the album, The Strain. He and his brother put that album together, and it, immediately became available on Bandcamp, and then it was available through a website that was set up to sell it, and it started to get some attention. And rather than sit back and see what happened with that album, he called me and said, hey, I want to do another record. I feel like I can do another record. So
Awesome.
We immediately got started on doing a successive record. He wasn't able to complete that record before he died, but the fact that he just never quit was
Right.
really inspirational to me as well. Like he did the thing that he wanted to do, but it became clear at that point that it wasn't a goal, it was a process. Like he wanted to be a creative and engaged person as long as it was possible. Not just as long as it took to make a record, but as long as possible,
Well, and it kind of puts it in perspective as far as when one thinks of the challenges of everyday life and the obstacles that either real or imagined that one puts in front of yourself. That this is a man that quite literally there wasn't going to be enough time to necessarily do everything they wanted to do, but he went at it and accomplished something amazing that touched a lot of people in a really profound way.
I had that was a changing experience for me working on that record with John.
Well, and so what happened with that second record? That it was never completed, is what it was.
Yeah, he got through. He did all the drum tracks for it, and he did the principal guitar stuff for it, and then he had to get back for family stuff, and he just wasn't able to pick up on it after that. I mean, there were tentative plans to have somebody else come and help him, finish the record, but it became obvious partway through it that he was doing it because he had to and not because he was trying to finish something,
Right.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, and I posted a picture of Mr. Grabski on the Radio Valencia homepage for those that are following the stream or in the chatterbox. There's a very fantastic tribute that's on the Electrical Audio Forum as well that I would highly suggest everyone check out, that has memories of the man and a very fitting eulogy by our guest, among many other things. And that's a decent segue, if anything, to touch upon the Electrical Audio Forum, which, for those not in the know, and I know a lot of people that are listening right now definitely are, is a message board internet forum on your electrical studio, the electrical audio studio, that has basically taken on a complete life of its own.
Yeah.
Where there's records, there's these incredible get-togethers that have now gone worldwide, all kinds of things. Like it's basically have become self-aware as its own entity, completely separate from the studio.
Yeah, it's almost like any of 100 dystopian computer science fiction films, except that it hasn't yet become malevolent.
Right. It's
Wow.
No, that's about as accurate as it comes. It's sort of, and it's just kind of become an interesting sounding board for very critical thinking individuals and very passionate people with strident opinions. And
well, what I like about the electrical message board is that it was from its inception, it was completely self-defining. Like we opened a message board and it had forums, for people to ask technical questions, to ask questions about the studio, things like that. And then we added a general discussion forum to it, just because there's a sort of a community of musicians and studio people, and we thought it might be an interesting place to generate some discussion, right?
And yeah, as it turns out, it was.
But it completely took off, and and I think part of the reason that it's become popular and so self-sustaining is that we've never tried to monetize it. We've never tried to turn it into a tool to attract business to the studio.
Right.
We haven't put ads up on it. We haven't used it as, we haven't attached clickbait to it to generate ad revenue. Like, we haven't done anything to the forum other than let the people on the forum talk about what they want to talk about. And I'm continually impressed at how well a group of people with no physical association and no prior association have been able to organize themselves into these really productive enterprises. They're, like as you said, there's a record label. There's now a distribution service for records
Fantastic.
that
Yes,
were spawned
amazing
by the message board or its community, its greater community. There have been a dozen or so shows and or barbecue weekends. There have been countless outings to Great America kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's casual get-togethers, fishing trips, dozens of romances, a couple of marriages, probably just as many divorces. A whole bunch of stuff has been facilitated by the board that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it's incredible to see the thing function just day after day. It just functions in a way that's self-policing. It doesn't. If anybody gets out of line, everybody else kind of straightens them out. If somebody becomes a really abusive troll, then they just sort of get shut down. It's a kind of an amazing demonstration of how people, if left to their own devices, can come up with really amazing stuff.
Right, and that is one of the things that is fantastic to me, is that it is so self-policing, and that it almost seems, not to be flippant about it, but it seems like it's a couple dozen IQ points above the average internet message forum, to say the least. And I find that to be, honestly, an astounding thing in this day and age of just, de-evolution being real, and then the race to the bottom as far as, any kind of critical thought towards anything. And it's remarkable, and it's kind of the things like it almost seems like a spinning plate act, but it's actually quite strong and strident. I think that's something that it's unique.
That's very inspirational. I get so down on, like, the general public sometimes just because I work in the service industry, and people can be really difficult. Humans can be really difficult. Just to know that, that's not always the case. It's just, that is so inspiring to me.
Well, service industry work is the sort of thing that very few people aspire to. Like, most people are doing that because that's the last refuge job, or
right.
It's a convenient way to, like, make dough in the short term while you're trying to get something else off the ground. And everyone, everyone makes that association, so no one thinks that you are a career barista, or you're a career waiter, or you're a career busboy. And I guess for that reason, everybody feels obliged to make those jobs miserable. Like, I always feel like it reflects really poorly on somebody if they don't treat people who are helping them get on with their day decently.
I totally agree.
Totally.
That's like a deal breaker for me if people can't be just civil. You don't even have to be extra kind, just civil to waiters or people in service.
It implies a myopia in their own thinking, too, that just, whether it's a self-absorption to think that they're just better than other people, or just not even thinking about that person as a person at all, but already thinking of themselves forward, down the street, doing whatever it is that they're doing.
Well, it's just a subtlety, I think, that exists, and people act... There's less anonymity. Wow. Anonymity?
Yeah.
That's a word.
That's it. That's the word. That is a word of sorts, yes.
But, the internet allows you to be anonymous, so sometimes people do say things online that maybe they wouldn't say in person, but there's, like, the subtlety in person that you pick up on right away if you have ever dealt with people enough to understand, like, wow, you really don't respect other humans as much as I do. I have a general love of humans, but sometimes just like anything, it can
that's a hard love.
Be really terrible. And to see that people can act in a way and check themselves is just, it gives me a certain level of hope. But I have a question for you, Steve, actually, because I read your essay that you wrote 20 years ago about the problem with the music industry.
He gets that a lot.
I know he does. But you recently, back in April, did an interview with Spin where you said that you felt like that problem had been resolved through, like, free music sharing and what's going on with the internet and everything. Bandcamp.
Well, certain aspects of it have been resolved,
Right.
The exploitive nature of the music scene has now been turned around to where it's much less likely that a record label is going to exploit a band, because there are far fewer record labels, and the ones that exist don't have enough money to buy the purchase to exploit somebody. If you do get signed up to a record label, well, there's a chance that you'd be exploited, but record labels are not doing well enough now that you really need to worry about them being around much longer.
Right.
And there's also, there are just so many avenues for bands to satisfy all of their distribution and performance needs themselves, that there's much less incentive to even get involved with the conventional music business.
Right.
By conventional, I mean old school, like pre-internet music business.
Right, because it's not like a necessary evil anymore. It's more of a choice, or a kind of a situational...
Well, it weeds out the people that are doing it for the, what I would call the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? For people that are attempting to get rich.
It used to be that record labels, that the major label music business, the record business, used to be a pretty big profit center. Like, you used to be able to manufacture a CD for 68 cents and sell it for $11.99 and keep all the money because you decided you weren't going to pay the artist anything. So that it used to be a very profitable business. It's not anymore, because people can get a hold of music cheaply or for free. So they're less inclined to pay retail for something, which means that the corporations are earning less off of it. They're trying to, balance the books by squeezing money out of other other ventures. But for bands, for working bands, you know, you can still play gigs, and gigs are now paying dramatically more than they used to. Like, just ticket prices for a live show
For some of
have
us.
escalated by an order of magnitude, and that just seems to be like an unspoken contract that the audience has made with the bands, which is, we will pay more for a gig because we're not paying anything for records now.
Right.
And because we're paying more for gigs, you get to keep more of the money anyway, so life is good for everybody.
Right. I'm curious to know how you feel about Spotify and that whole thing that happened a few months ago where an LA band, Volfec?
Oh, the one that gamed the system with the put this on while you're sleeping.
Yeah, they released an
situation.
album called Sleepify that was 10 hours of silence, pretty much.
By the way, that guy totally looks like a chooch in that promo picture of them. Like, he looks like he has to take a crap really bad.
Okay.
But anyway,
I'll have to admit I'm completely unaware of this thing that you're discussing,
So, all right,
and also I don't care about it.
well, all right. So this is for the benefit of the audience that may particularly care about this, may not. There's this band that put a record of silence up on Spotify, and the summation of the story is that they asked their fans to play this while you sleep, so that we can gather our incremental, 1/10 of 1 cent profit from all of this and make some money on it. And they did indeed do that, right?
Like $20,000, I think.
Right, gaming the system. And
Well, that's the sort of trick that will work once for 20 grand,
Exactly.
and then it won't work anymore because Spotify will say we're no longer accepting albums of silence.
right,
You know.
and maybe the guy can buy some new pants for the ones he crapped from his promo picture. Luckily.
So yeah, I mean, the Spotify specifically, and the sort of satellite music content channels, things like that, those are all attempts by the mainstream music industry to resurrect itself in a new form. Like Beats Music, Spotify. Those are attempts to corner a market. And once, if they corner the market, well, then they can abuse the audience in that way. I mean, I've seen in practice that people treat all the music distribution networks basically interchangeably. Like, people treat Pandora the same way they treat the playlists on their laptop, which is the same way that they treat Spotify, or the same way that they treat, like, sites that are technically illegal that provide downloads or bundles of stuff on peer-to-peer networks that are torrenting. Like, people treat all that stuff equivalently. So the instant something becomes kind of annoying, people stop using it. They'll use one of the competitors. And the instant you try to monetize something, it becomes annoying. So I think that's a problem that will kind of solve itself. Spotify is convenient for some people. I've noticed that, like, every now and again people will post Spotify links on their websites or on their Facebook posts or whatever, and if you try to click on it, it wants you to download Spotify and create an account and become a user of Spotify, and I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm the same way.
So whatever utility they think they're gaining by putting a link to a Spotify tune on their website, they're losing that utility versus me and people like me, right? Whereas if they put up something from SoundCloud or, any of the bazillion free servers, or a YouTube link or something like that, where I don't have to, as a user, I don't have to do anything other than click it in order to hear what they're talking about, then that's much, much more likely to get me to pay attention to what they're doing. So I think a lot of these things have kind of built-in regulation or built-in filtering that will prevent them from becoming ubiquitous. As far as their payments to authors and like songwriters and stuff like that, I don't care about that stuff. I actually have a kind of a fundamental objection to intellectual property as a concept. I think it's been grossly overindulged, and I feel like it's really, really self-important for an artist of any kind, of any stature, to presume that they deserve to be paid every time somebody hears something that they've done. I think that that's like insulting to the audience. It sort of belies the way people treat every other aspect of their lives. I mean, it flies in the face of the way people treat every other thing in their lives. Like, you don't have to pay something every time you read a book, whether it's from whether you pick it up from a library or pick it up off the coffee table. And that's sort of the contract that these people want to have with the world, is that whenever there is any access to anything that they did, they want people to pay for it. And I just think that's rude, and I don't want to indulge that.
Right,
so
and that is behavior.
So I could care less what the payment scheme is like for things like Spotify. I think, if you get a penny out of them, great. You've just gotten a penny,
So, all right, then look at it this way. So, as far as things like streaming services like Spotify that has an entire band's catalog up, means that for the most part things kind of exist in a constant present tense, as well as new things coming down the line. There's still everything, older bands' discography, long dead bands that kids can experience for the first time. Everything is available all the time, always. But how do you feel about all this instant availability, as far as, people only have a finite amount of attention that they can pay to anything? And there's been some talk by some people that this isn't necessarily the best thing in the world for people as we currently have our brains wired, because you only have so much room in the bucket before the bucket starts overflowing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think everybody satisfies their desires and then they move on. I mean, it's exactly the same as hunger or artistic aspirations or the drive to physically exert yourself or anything else. It's like, if you're interested in music, you're going to pursue music to the degree that satisfies your curiosity, and then you'll stop. And I don't see how having more of it available to you more of the time is going to change that. It might mean that you might spend your 20 minutes a day on music in a slightly different fashion. I don't see it as a problem.
Okay, so I mean,
I do see that, and I see the democratization of distribution as a tremendous boon to musicians. Like the fact that two kids can get together in the basement and knock out some goofy song, film it on an iPhone, put it on YouTube, and then a week later be famous around the world. I think that's incredible. I also think that somebody slaving away on his artistic, on the thing that is the purest expression of his artistic impulse, and then finally realizing it and being able to release that and find 6 people on Earth that might otherwise have not run across it, I think that's incredible,
No, it is, and it's something that we've never had in the history of our culture. So it's something that's it's still a new experience for most people, that we have this availability of anything at any time.
Yeah, I think it's important not to consider music purely as a commercial commodity, and remember that it is somebody's life's work. It's somebody's fondest dream that someone somewhere will hear his music, and the fact that is now trivially easy, I think, is incredible.
Well, and I wouldn't even necessarily tie it up with commercial aspirations. I would just say that as far as, there's only so many hours in the day. Like, I'm someone that actively seeks out new music. I seek out new music for my personal enjoyment. I seek it out to put on the radio show, to expose other people when I find music I really enjoy. But, there's stuff that I miss constantly, and I aggressively search for new music. So
the thing that's good about it is that it doesn't expire, and if you miss it this week, you might find it next week.
It'll still be good then.
There's really no. It's not like these are ripe blueberries that are going to go moldy. I don't think you need to worry about catching everything on the first bounce.
All right, touche.
That's a good point. And you can revisit things that you forgot about. That's one of my favorite things to do. Like, that band Radon that I sent to Conan a few days ago, they're from my hometown in Florida, and they're really great, and we're very influential.
You realize that from a statistical standpoint, that's extraordinarily unlikely that this band from Florida were good.
Wow, touche.
So you can
right,
understand the skepticism on the part of the listening audience. Okay.
I mean, I left for a reason, so
It's like strike one and strike two. They're from where? Ooh.
they're pretty. I think they're good. I don't know. Maybe they're not good.
Yeah, it's fine. It's these are jokes. These are the jokes.
Just jokes, people. So,
Are they?
yeah, I mean, the other thing that's really cool about the sort of vestigial, like, oral history that appears on the internet is that, like, whatever you're into, somebody did a blog about it. You know, like, I'm absolutely certain there's a blog about, you know, old school Florida bands, and if you found that blog, you'd be able to not just find this band that you remembered from your adolescence, but you'd be able to find like a half a dozen other bands that you may not have known about at the time, and somebody else has already done all the work for you. They've already found all that stuff, already digitized it, already put it up on the internet, and your life is now better because somebody else violated all those copyrights for you, you know?
And you can read it, and it'll be probably alternately depressing and delightful depending on which entry you're looking at any given time, especially if band promo pictures are included, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I enjoy nostalgia, so, I mean, I guess it's very convenient that we live in a time that I could just do that and be like, oh, yeah, I forgot about all this. Oh, great. Take me back in a time capsule.
I mean, this, you know, in an odd way, the sort of prevalence of digital communication is an extension of something that I've sort of based my working life on, which is that the recordings that I make for people as an engineer in the studio, like when I'm working for a band in the studio, I feel obliged to make those recordings durable and permanent, because I know that it's not uncommon for bands to not find an audience during their natural life. And so I feel like it's incumbent on me to make sure that the recordings that a band makes during its active life, like that those are durable, like those will survive long enough to potentially find an audience. I mean, we've seen it happen hundreds of times where bands, long after they've broken up, bands find an audience, and their records, which were initially not well regarded, have become, you know, post-mortem have become classics.
Right.
And I would like to afford all of my clients the opportunity to be in that situation of being able to find an audience eventually, even if it takes years. And that's why I don't use digital methods in the studio. I mean, that's the principal reason why I don't use digital methods in the studio, is that all of the digital recording technologies are ephemeral. That is, the work product is a file that's resident on a drive somewhere, and not embodied in a physical object that could be put into an archive. So the durability of analog recordings is so remarkable that you can literally play some of the very first analog recordings ever made now. And that's not true of digital recordings made even 10 or 15 years ago. Some of those are now irretrievably lost.
Yeah, there's no classic DAT show, you know. That's not a thing that happens.
And so I feel like the ubiquity of the internet and the how the internet keeps proving the point that good music eventually finds its audience. Like, that validates my working methods of making sure that the masters for music that is important to the people who made it survives in the hope that it will eventually find an audience.
Sure, and that's the hope, right? I mean, that's kind of
like that Death, the band from the 70s.
Sure,
just blew up.
The post-punk band Death, yeah.
Yeah, that's a more widely known story of a similar idea. Yeah,
and they certainly were not beloved in their when they were around. They were around for this time.
The connection is not that great, so I can't really understand what you're saying. But you are talking about a band. I just didn't get the name of the band.
Oh, the band Death, the post-punk band from Detroit.
Right.
And that's a good example for what you're speaking to, as far as people discovering something, years down the line, and culture and society somewhat catching up to that.
But I mean, there are other more, sort of more obvious examples. You have guys like Jonathan Richman, who, were unknown and essentially failed as a recording artist. Like he'd recorded some demos that never got released, and then he recorded an album that was sort of perfunctorily released on a record label that was kind of a tax shelter for somebody.
Right.
Then
interesting story, yeah.
He sort of created this sort of, troubadour career for himself, and all those recordings that he did with his garage rock band are now considered classic,
Right. And they are. It's wonderful music, but at the time, it definitely didn't fit any easy box or criteria that met with what people expected rock music to sound like in a certain way. And it didn't have, because of the reasons you mentioned, it didn't have the distribution options available that even they would have had today. They're like, oh, there's the Modern Lovers Bandcamp. They
right.
put up, and then, hey, this is amazing. I'm going to play this on my show, or like listen to it all the time. And that is a very real thing. So once again, we're talking to Steve Albini. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been great talking to you. I hopefully we can keep you on for a little longer. I wanted to know. So you mentioned that you were just catching up with some correspondence today. What does a typical Steve Albini day look like?
Well, I get up. These days, I get up around 7:30 or 8. I'll take care of whatever I need to take care of at the house. Then I'll ride my bike to the studio, and then I'll do correspondence and email until the band gets here, and then I make a record until evening, typically 8, 9, or 10, somewhere in there. Sometimes it goes later. Then I'll ride my bike home, make dinner for my wife, watch the Colbert Report, and go to sleep.
Nice. So
if I get a day off, then I'll play cards or putter around in the basement doing some woodworking, that kind of stuff. I play billiards occasionally. I don't really have a particularly active life. I mean, I don't have a really exciting life. It's basically, work, sleep, wife, and a few indulgences,
Do you find yourself playing guitar much recreationally?
Only when there's, like, when we scheduled time for Shellac to get together and do either songwriting stuff, rehearsals, or just to play together. I don't just sit with a guitar in my lap and write songs for their own sake. I will fiddle around on a guitar very rarely, but I mean that could explain the very very low level of productivity of the band that I'm in.
Right.
But
well, it almost
we all sort of treat it the same way. We do it because we love it, but we don't feel obliged to do it.
Right. It's not something that you do as a vocation necessarily. I mean, it almost seems like you've traded a certain amount of longevity over short-term productivity, which is, I think, it seems like it's a very active choice that you guys made to keep it sustainable.
I mean, we consciously decided that we weren't going to be like trying to do shows every week. We weren't going to try to, we don't all live in the same city, which complicates matters. But I believe that if we did all live in the same city, our level of productivity would be about the same.
Right.
And for a couple of years there, we did all live in Chicago. Todd lived in Chicago for a couple of years, and it didn't really change things. We still had to schedule rehearsals around our work obligations. We didn't record with any greater frequency. We didn't play shows with any greater frequency. It basically didn't change anything.
Well, and so you actually there is a new Shellac record coming up, I think next week or something along those lines, which is Dude Incredible, no comma, right?
Yeah.
What's the punctuation, lack of punctuation there all about?
Well, it's just two words, really. We noticed that we were saying it kind of a lot within the band, and so we hung it on one of the songs that we were writing at the time, and then that became the name of the album that we were working on.
And it's been 7 years, I think, since the last one.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I'll admit I've lost track. It's been kind of a long time.
So it's been 7 years. I imagine, if you're not writing these songs, necessarily all at the same time, they're kind of coming through in a very gradual, like someone say, more organic process. Why release it as an album instead of just putting out singles like you did when you first were a band?
Well, a number of reasons. Like the principal one being that the effort required to assemble, manufacture, and distribute a single isn't significantly less than assembling, manufacturing, distributing an album. Like,
sure,
you still have to organize all the manufacturing details. You still have to get the pressing parts made. You have to get design and print the cover. You have to assemble everything. You have to ship it all out. Like, it's not a lot easier to do a single than it is to do an album. So then the arguments for doing individual singles start to dwindle. Since it's not easier, why would you do it that way? Well, let's say you felt like the songs were topical and they had to get out right away. Well, that's not the case with us, you know. Or let's say you felt like your band was, you know, arcing up in popularity and you wanted to stoke the fires of public relations and, you know, get on the Tonight Show or whatever and that's not the case with us. You know, our audience, I believe our audience kind of knows who it is already, and we're not going to trick new people into liking our band temporarily by putting out a new single. So, like, there's just a very small number of reasons for putting out individual songs if you know that eventually you're going to be putting out, if you know eventually that you're going to have enough to make an album out of. You know, as physical objects, I like singles. I think they're nice. And I like the fact that there's a nice digestible chunk of a band that gives you a sort of an encapsulation of what a band is like in a very quick fashion. I like that. I like how, you know, like I own a lot of records, and my singles, a lot of those singles represent very specific moments in my life. Like, I remember picking the fall single, Lie, Dream of a Casino Soul. I remember the physical act of picking that up out of the rack, because I had to justify it to the guy that I was standing next to, because he thought that wasn't as good as the last fall single, right?
Right.
So I remember that moment, like those moments, like are embedded in my memory, and I associate them with specific records, and I'm glad that I had that opportunity. But I don't want to presume that we mean that to anybody else, and so we always operate on the basis of what we want to do as a band, rather than what we think other people's expectations might be. And so for us in the band, we were thinking of all these songs as a group together, and we decided we were going to put them out as an album, and that's that, you know.
Right, and you know, there's nothing wrong with just, hey, we like to put out albums. You know, that's a totally acceptable thing. That's also acceptable answer. But it is, I mean, it's interesting that, like, for instance, and I have not heard this new record, but you got a song called "The People's Microphone" on there. You're talking about topical things. I mean, that was, yeah. And granted, you know, I you know, we broadcast from San Francisco, but I live in Oakland, which was one of the heart of the Occupy movement. The People's Microphone, for those that aren't familiar, was a thing where it was an amazing social construct where you were dealing with people that normally would be like a technological solution to something, which is that you've got this large group of people and you're trying to, you know, have the speaker be heard. That was done sort of as a societal organization and like a social compact of just repeating the words of what the person said as you go out and out from the circles. I mean, to me, that's as topical as it can get, because that's something that when I saw it, I was blown away. I was like, wow, what is this? What's going on? Yeah,
I mean that seeing that in action was really moving to me, and it made an impression on me, and it made me think about the mechanics of it. It made me think about the utility of it as a means of, not just as a means of disseminating information across a large physical space, but a way of, like, embedding ideas within everyone in an area, and also, like, forcing them to consider the idea. Like, I really like, one of the things about the activity that makes the People's Microphone is that everyone that's repeating what they're repeating is hearing it in his own voice.
Right.
Right? So in that instant, you're evaluating the veracity of the thing that you're saying.
You have to think about it. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You have to think about it. You're saying these words. You're not just making sounds. You're not just mimicking the sound. You are saying something in your own voice, and no one wants to be duplicitous. Or, I mean, some people do, I suppose, as a matter of utility, but, like, nobody wants to be bullshitting, right?
Right.
So everyone that repeats it is evaluating that content and forming an opinion about it. And so it's a way. So in a way, you can imagine that the best ideas would propagate the most and be the loudest, and the ideas that were flimsy or were insubstantial would tend to die out. And I don't know if that works that way in practice, but that was one of the first things that I thought of when I saw that happening, was that, well, that's a pretty good filter, because people aren't just going to stand there and shout lies at each other.
Right, and I mean that's significant. I think it's like a real time filter that every person gets to apply, as sort of like, as you were mentioning earlier. We were talking about the Electrical Audio Forum being a self-policing community. It's the idea of that, there's certain things that maybe you would want to say louder because you think that that's an inspiring message or something you personally agree with or are feeling. And that's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anybody in the Occupy movement actually articulate it that way. So thanks for sharing that. I'm looking forward to hearing that record. It's
oddly, that song is an instrumental.
Yeah.
So you and your friends can get together and supply your own text.
Fantastic. And there's a couple. What's up there? There's all the surveyors, mayor surveyor. There's a lot of surveyor stuff going on with these song titles.
It's kind of a conversational loop that we got stuck in. It started with an observation. I don't remember who made the observation, either Bob or me. One or the other of us, and I don't remember which, made the observation that a lot of the original founding fathers in the United States, a lot of the original American revolutionaries, were surveyors, like literally surveyors, meaning that they mapped out this new country, right?
Right, like that's like literally like mapped out, like went to the location and
literally pasted off yard by yard,
right,
and drew a map, right? So, and I was struck by how specific a relationship you would then have with this place that you were hoping to be your new country if you had measured it inch by inch. It's like if you build a house, you know the dimensions of every room, you know where every pipe is, you know like where everything is. You know that house intimately in the way that you know your friends and family, the way that you know your profession. And you're gonna, if you're living there, you have like a working knowledge of it and an understanding of it that nobody who just like showed up at a development and bought a house could ever have. Right. So that's the relationship those people had with their version of America, and I think that's one of the things that engendered the kind of patriotism that they had, which was that they knew the place that intimately, right? And then, it's not really related, but I do think I don't think it's insignificant that now anybody who wants to can sort of adopt the stance of patriotism or adopt the notion of patriotism,
right,
without doing so much as even knowing where the county line is, or and there are these political districts that are gerrymandered for the sole purpose of protecting one old white dude's job, that kind of thing.
Right, the career politician sort of mindset
and that
choosing the voter.
Yeah, and I don't know. I guess we kind of romanticized it slightly, and we got into a conversational loop about it, is the way I would explain it. And so we were talking about it for a while, and then we each did some looking into the background of this sort of stuff, and then the other uses for the term survey sort of cropped into the conversation, and I feel awkward explaining this stuff because we haven't really even articulated it that much amongst ourselves in the band. It's just we ended up naming a bunch of songs with Surveyor. That's all. I mean,
which is a perfectly legitimate answer as well.
Yeah.
But we appreciate the thought that you put into. I mean, it definitely seems like there's a lot of thoughtfulness that you guys put into your songs that I always appreciate. As for instance, this show, Protonic Reversal, we actually the end song, the closing song, if you will, is the end of radio. And which I don't believe I ever mentioned to you, but by the way, I hope that's cool because it's been the end song for quite some time now.
Well, that's nice of you.
And one of the things that really struck a chord with me with it is just, the idea that, okay, we have the idea of, radio itself changing and the nature of broadcasting changing, especially with things like streams, which people are listening to right now, to this conversation, things along those lines. And then, there's that line, can you really call it broadcasting if nobody's listening? And that's always something that I thought was so evocative because it hammers home it hammers home the idea that having things for a more dedicated listening audience, like smaller enclaves, where it means more to those people, which are not necessarily hitting millions of people, things along those lines. And I just wonder, what was a specific inspiration for that? Like, how did that come to? Are you a big radio fan? Is that
not really? It's just there was. Radio has been a constant in my life, and it seemed like there was a chance that terrestrial radio would go away during my life, during my lifetime. Like terrestrial radio as a mass communications means, might disappear in my lifetime. And there was a lot of conversation about it in the punditry that that the internet was taking over all of the functions of radio, and that sort of stuff. And then we just it made me reflect on all the different ways that radio has changed and what using radio as a metaphor has meant in different eras. Like when radio was new, to talk about things as being radio meant that they were the most up-to-date, most sophisticated, most technologically advanced things that there could be, and so you had radio was attached to all kinds of things, like, Slingerland made drum kits called the Radio King,
right.
And a children's wagon was called the Radio Flyer.
I was going to say the Radio Flyer, yeah.
Things that had literally no association with radio whatsoever. It would be like as if somebody made a skateboard now and called it the Internet Skateboard,
I think I might put a patent on that. It sounds like a million-selling idea.
So, and precisely the same thing happened with radio that happened with the Internet, in that there was a big stock bubble. A bunch of people were floating worthless stocks that just had the name radio, the word radio in their name, and, millions were made and lost in this sort of perpetual capitalist circle jerk that is the stock market. And, and then radio eventually consolidated and became kind of monolithic, and then you had these radio networks that were super important, and then radio sort of democratized, and there were all these little tiny small independent radio stations all over. And there was just a lot of different things that happened to radio in my life and over the course of my life, and I was interested in the decay of that culture. Like radio celebrities used to get paid fortunes, There were, morning DJs in big cities were paid astronomical sums to jump from one station to another because that market share was so valuable, And now they're kind of a footnote. Like, if someone, can you even name a radio celebrity now?
John Houlihan.
Yeah. And he's not even on the radio.
No, he's not even on the radio.
That didn't even take you 10 seconds. Wow.
No, but you're right. I mean, it's like that era is, mostly kind of a historical footnote at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, they're sort of...
But, there was stuff that was significant to me and that I think was culturally important and, quite satisfying on the radio. And I'm not denigrating that. I'm just saying, I guess my point in writing the song was that it was worth thinking about the decay of an aspect of culture and seeing how that might relate on a personal level or to other venues. Like, there may very well be a time when walking around on the street outside your house is considered as archaic as listening to a transistor radio would be now.
Right.
You know.
Well, you don't use your avatar for that? You know. Exactly. That's some interesting food for thought there, and it's something I think we all think about here at the station, because we're certainly, Radio Valencia is not alone, and the fact that we're a community radio station of people that largely do it for the love of it, but it's something that's done for an ever smaller but more dedicated audience, and it's interesting to think about that societal change just over the course of my lifetime, let alone for like the last 100 years, or things along those lines. So
it blows my mind that like we have that perspective of change, whereas like the younger generations don't have that. It's like,
well, I don't know. I think
those damn kids.
Every generation
way.
thinks that they have the top perch and they can see the farthest, and I think that's preposterous. Like a friend of mine has a 9-year-old daughter, and I envy her because she's going to get to see and do and experience things that are going to be utterly new, not just like things that haven't happened before, but she's going to have experiences for the first time that are mundane to me now.
Right.
And then she's going to build her own, like, personal perspective, which, by virtue of it happening 50 years later than mine, is going to be an awful lot more, informed than mine is. So it's hard not to be envious of somebody who's going to know more and see more of the world than you could have.
Right.
So I don't know. I think this idea that the younger generation doesn't think correctly or whatever. I think that it's all a learning process. Like when you're young, you act like a schmuck and you do all kinds of stupid stuff. And you're young and made out of rubber, and nothing hurts you, so you do all kinds of stuff. And then as you mature, you figure out what's important in your life, and you zero in on things that matter. And I think that's a process that everybody's going to go through inevitably, and I think it's a red herring to presume that any one generation doesn't get it.
Well, sure. I mean, I think there's definitely... Well, and then there's this idea that there's a lot of retrospection and emphasis put on the past with these Throwback Thursdays kind of things that it's interesting that people kind of make a tendency towards retrospection as a ethos, if you will, as they advance later on, and it's interesting to see that happening even to people in my own generation that they suddenly start talking trash about the kids' music, quote unquote, and like, really, you know who you sound like? You sound like the idiots we used to laugh at. Like it's music is doing fine. It's just that you're not aggressively searching for it anymore, and that's okay if you let it be okay. But it doesn't mean that they're at fault for it.
Yeah, I feel like there's always been a mainstream of music, and now the mainstream of music is just dramatically more diversified and more compartmentalized into different sub-idioms, right? So finding what you think is counterculture might depend on what things you think are mainstream, and finding stuff that stimulates you uniquely is going to depend on what you've already been exposed to. So I think there's going to be a lot of people who feel like there's nothing of interest around them, but that's because they're not doing the legwork.
Right.
And they, if they were to move to a different neighborhood or start hanging out at a different bar or had 3 different friends in their circle of friends, then they would have a completely different perspective,
Sure, totally. And so on that same note, is there anything as far as, newer bands or records or things that have really been blowing your mind of late that have come out of nowhere and enriched your life?
Well, because of my job, where I make records every day, I hear an awful lot of music, and
right.
An awful lot of it is stuff that isn't actually available, because it's stuff that's just been recorded that isn't, it's so fresh it's not even out, you know. So a lot of the stuff that I hear that I find exciting and inspiring is work in progress, you know.
Right.
So, like, last week I worked on a record I started work on a new album for Nina Nastasia. She's a singer from New York that I've done a half dozen records with.
Fantastic. I like her a lot.
I'm just crazy about her music. I think she's an incredible talent. And just hearing new songs from her, sung in her voice, I got shivers hearing it, you know. Just the fact that it was new. I can't even tell you if it's good. All I can tell you is that, like, the experience of listening to it was really satisfying and really exciting to me. I work on a lot of different music, and so from week to week, there might be something like, oh, that drum part there, that was really cool. I've never heard that before.
Mm.
But it would be overstating it to say that there's this great record I'm working on, because there's this thing that I find really exciting and really stimulating, but it's a tiny sliver of what is ultimately going to make its way out. So, and another problem that I have is that when you're in the studio working on music, you listen in a way that's completely different from the way you listen to music for entertainment.
Absolutely.
You're listening for technical flaws. You're listening for practical stuff that you need to consider as an engineer to make the session go smoothly. You're listening for misbehaving equipment, all this other stuff. You're not listening in the way that you're, you know, nodding your head along and rocking out to something. So you're kind of prevented from enjoying the music just by the requirements of the job, you know. But the problem with it is that you spend all day listening to music that you're being prevented from enjoying, and then when you go home, you're fatigued from the act of listening,
right,
and you don't want to listen to music.
Right.
So, in a way, it's kind of a nasty, you know, the job is its own punishment, really.
Well, and that's something that, you know, it's a very close friend of mine, ex-bandmate, that's actually why he stopped engineering bands in the first place, is because it was actually ruining his enjoyment of listening to music for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, do you find that, like, do you want to just, like, sit in, like, an isolation room when you're not recording records? Do you just not want any noise at all?
Well, when I have days off when I'm not working in the studio, I do tend to do things completely unaffiliated with music. Like my wife and I'll go on a little trip someplace, or like, you know, I'll do chores around the house, or I'll do stuff like that, where I'm completely disengaged from the music scene and my job at the studio and the obligations that music has placed on me. Like, I tend not to be involved in music at all when I don't have an obligation to do it in the studio. The one exception being when I'm doing stuff with Shellac.
Of course, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. That's you're going to want to, yeah. I mean, you want to hear things back, I'm sure, right?
Well, I mean, we like playing together, so we play together. What I don't do, like, I'm literally never going to jam with people. Like, just take a guitar over to somebody's place and just jam. That's literally never going to happen. It has never happened, and I cannot fathom it happening. And, you know, I do go see live music, but typically it's stuff that I'm already excited about.
Are you sure? Because I have a authentic relic Eric Clapton Strat that I think you really enjoy playing.
Alrighty then.
That's a lie.
I am sure between us we can find a place where you could sell it at a profit.
I want to get a job where I actually get to relic guitars, meaning that, you know, I take them on tour, jack them up, and then sell them at an inflated price to rich lawyers. But anyway, sorry, you had a point. So
I was in the airport not that long ago. I was traveling, and they have the last vestige of the bookstore is the airport, right? Like the last place where you can actually find books and magazines for sale is at the airport, right? So there was a book and magazine store there, and I was flipping through all the books and magazines, and they had I don't know if you're familiar with the magazine Cigar Aficionado. It's a very corny magazine for rich people to like. It basically promotes cigar smoking and the lifestyle associated with cigar smoking.
Sure.
Right? Well, there's a spin-off magazine called Guitar Aficionado.
God.
Which is an absolutely staggering piece of work. Like, it is by, for, and about collectible rare guitars as played by people with way more money than musical ability. It's an incredible artifact of our time. Like, I can't think of anything else like this that exists, where it's full of ads for very expensive guitars. It is all about guitars, not a whisper of music
right,
in the whole magazine.
Just the tool.
Just the guitars. Not a single actual working musician will ever have a subscription to this magazine.
Right.
And literally none of the guitars in it will ever be played on stage. Like, that's how specific this magazine is.
Right.
It's incredible.
Might as well be about museum pieces or something along those lines, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they've honed in on their audience. Their audience is guys who have a room in the basement where they keep all their guitars under, you know, within a humidity-controlled environment, and they have their vintage boutique amp, and they go down there a couple times a week and jam, you know?
I believe the very offensive to me term, anyway, is called man cave, I think is where that happens.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Ugh, disgusting. You know, Steve, this has been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for doing it, man. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Before we let you go, because we're actually running up on time limit here, which is a major shame, but it's flown by for me and us at least, if not for you. I did want to know, would you mind doing a old school station ID for Radio Valencia? Someone asked if I would get one from you. Just something along the lines of, you know, this is Steve Albini and you're listening to Radio Valencia, which is the name of the
station. Sure, I can say that. I can say that. In the fashion of the people's microphone, I'll repeat what you just said. This is Steve Albini and you're listening to Radio Valencia.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, sir. That was beautiful.
All right.
You know what? It was so beautiful. People have busted loose in applause. Passing crowd. Just walking out. How on earth heated walkway? You have a heated walkway, right? How did you come to the brilliant solution of having a heated walkway in
Well, it
Chicago?
snows a lot here, and it snows a lot in Chicago, and I don't like shoveling snow. And we're renovating an old house that had a big flat roof, so we could put solar hot water collectors on the roof. And so we have a massive hot water storage tank in the basement of the house, and we can use that hot water for a bunch of different things, and one of them is melting the snow on the sidewalk so I don't have to shovel it.
Ingenious.
Yeah.
That's not something I would have thought of, but then I also live in a climate where snow is not a prevailing weather condition or any kind of lifestyle impediment of any kind. So that's a good solution. I was very impressed by that. So, Steve,
I'm equal measures smart and lazy, and those two things happen to have converged on that one solution. So.
Fantastic. Any parting words? Anything you'd like to share with the listening audience?
No, not really. Don't quit. That's probably about it.
Fantastic. Don't quit. Steve, thank you so much, man.
All right.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Steve Albini, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear some shellac. Like that guy.
time was, I could move my arms like a bird and
that was Spoke.
Protonic reversal.
But none of the Mr. Steve Albini. Had a little shellac block there for you. Coming at you. On the phone, we have Mr.
Hey, this is Steve Albini. Is it time for the interview? I'm ready. Listen, time is money, baby. We got to move fast on this interview. I got money to be made. I love money. Let's make some. I got records to make. I got money to make. I want to tell you one thing. Take the points.
Always take the points. That's what I hear.
Always take the points. I fucked that whole thing up. I screwed my entire life up. By the way, In Uteros was recorded entirely on an iPhone. So you know.
just to get that out of the way.
The whole thing, directly to iPhone.
Oh,
right,
fantastic.
I gotta run because I gotta record these clowns. I want to suck down a couple cold Bud Lights before I start recording. That's my daily routine, all right?
Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
All right, anytime, Conan's, and God bless America. Thank you.
Oh, we do have fun here. All right, well, heck of a show. Thanks for listening, people. You've been listening to
Protonic reversal.
Other than Radio Valencia. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Steve Albini, our guest. What a cool guy. Find him on the internet.
As we come to the close of our broadcast day.
He always goes for the points, as you hear.
This is my farewell transmission.
Dude Incredible's coming out a couple weeks. Check that out.
Signing off. Mr. and Mrs. America.
You can hear this show every Thursday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. It's called
Protonic reversal.
Anyone within the sound of my voice.
And it's on Radio Valencia. Bitch. It's been a blast. Real-time draw.
I've got
I had to bail, so she sends her best to everybody.
50,000 watts of power.
RadioNeutron.com for podcasts and listen to it in on real time.
I want to ionize the air.
That's about it. Don't quit. Later.
This microphone turns sound into electricity. Can you hear me now? Out on Route 128, you're dark and lonely. I got my radio on. Can you hear me now? 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 See you on the radio. And that snare drum and that drum roll means we've got a winner. If you're the fifth caller, or any caller at all, welcome to my top 10. I'd like to thank our sponsor. But we haven't got a sponsor. Not if you were the last man on earth. She was prepared to prove it. This one goes out to a special girl. But there is no special girl. record. The last what? Leaves the transmitter. Circles the globe in search of a listener. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Is it really broadcasting if there's no one there to receive? It's the end of radio. As we come to the close of our broadcast day, got my radio on. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? This is a test! If this had been a real emergency,